Sarah's mother was placing flowers on her daughter's memorial bench when she saw a familiar figure walking toward her across the Yellowstone parking lot. Her daughter, unchanged, alone, with a story that made no sense. Before we uncover what really happened that day, a quick whisper. This channel explores mysteries history tried to bury, lost expeditions, missing people, discoveries that vanished. If you're drawn to stories mainstream history won't tell, consider subscribing. Linda Morrison had made this pilgrimage every month for 2 years. The memorial bench overlooked the grand prismatic spring, where her daughter Sarah and 3 friends had last been photographed together. The hot springs bubbled and steamed in the morning cold, sulfur scenting the air with the smell of something ancient and untamed. Linda could hear the distant calls of elk in the valley below, the same sounds Sarah had recorded on her phone the morning she disappeared. Sarah Morrison had been 22 when she organized the Yellowstone trip, the daughter everyone called responsible, the one who made detailed itineraries and packed first aid kits and called her mother every night during college. Sarah studied environmental science at Denver University, drawn to the outdoors by a passion that burned bright and steady. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind of person others naturally followed. Her friends trusted her judgment completely, which made what happened even more impossible to understand. David Park was Sarah's study partner turned best friend, a pre-med student whose Korean immigrant parents had sacrificed everything for his education. Brilliant but anxious, David approached everything with meticulous preparation. He researched Yellowstone for weeks before the trip, reading geological surveys and wildlife safety reports. His backpack contained enough medical supplies for a small expedition. David was the one who insisted they register their hiking plans with park rangers, the one who carried backup GPS devices and emergency beacons. His methodical nature made him an unlikely candidate for disappearing without a trace. Jessica Cole brought art supplies everywhere she went. The daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Jessica had earned her art scholarship through pure talent and stubborn determination. She sketched constantly, filling notebook after notebook with drawings of landscapes, faces, moments that caught her eye. Her friends teased her about the heavy art bag she lugged on every hiking trip, but Jessica never went anywhere without the tools to capture what she saw. She had planned to spend the Yellowstone trip documenting the thermal features for her senior portfolio. Her sketchbooks were found in the rental car, but the drawings she made in the park were never recovered. Marcus Bailey was the group's photographer and unofficial comedian. A journalism major with an infectious laugh and an expensive camera his grandmother had given him for Christmas. Marcus documented everything, from Sarah's careful trip planning to David's anxious equipment checks to Jessica's artistic process. He was the one who convinced them to take the remote trail, promising unique shots away from tourist crowds. Marcus came from a tight-knit family in Boulder. His parents and younger sister Grace treated his friends like extended family, hosting barbecues and study sessions. His absence left a hole that went beyond one missing person. The 4 had met during freshman orientation and bonded over shared love of hiking and camping. They spent weekends exploring Colorado's mountain trails, each bringing different strengths to their adventures. Sarah planned routes and managed logistics. David handled safety and emergency preparedness. Jessica documented their experiences through art. Marcus captured their memories through photography and kept spirits high during difficult climbs. They were more than friends, they had become a found family, supporting each other through college pressures, family dramas, and romantic heartbreaks. Detective Rebecca Walsh remembered the morning she got the call about the missing students. March 18, 2022, 6 a.m. Coffee still steaming on her desk when the phone rang. 4 college kids hadn't returned from a day hike in Yellowstone. At first, Walsh assumed it would be routine. Lost hikers usually turned up within hours, sheepish and dehydrated but safe. She had worked missing person cases in national parks for 8 years. She thought she had seen everything. The families arrived throughout that first day, driving through the night from Denver, Seattle, and Boulder. Linda Morrison was the first to reach the park, her hands shaking as she showed rangers photos of the 4 friends. David's parents, Dr. James Park, and his wife Helen, brought medical expertise and systematic thinking to the search planning. Jessica's mother, Carmen Cole, took leave from her nursing job and refused to return home until her daughter was found. Marcus's family arrived as a unit: parents, sister Grace, aunts and uncles who insisted on joining search teams despite having no wilderness experience. The rental car discovery on day 3 changed everything. Walsh approached the vehicle with growing unease, noting details that made no sense. The doors were unlocked, but nothing was stolen. Sarah's purse contained $200 in cash. David's expensive GPS watch sat on the dashboard. Jessica's art supplies were organized exactly as she always kept them. Marcus's backup camera held photos from earlier in their trip, normal vacation shots of thermal features and wildlife, the 4 friends smiling and laughing, completely unaware of what was coming. But what disturbed Walsh most was the absence of struggle. No signs of hurried departure, no scattered belongings suggesting sudden emergency. Personal items were arranged as if the 4 had stepped away for a moment and planned to return. Sarah's water bottle sat in the cup holder, still half full. David's trail map was folded and marked with their planned route. Jessica's sketch of Old Faithful was tucked carefully into her bag. Marcus's camera showed photos taken just hours before they vanished, including a final selfie of all 4 friends at the thermal pools, Sarah's arm around Jessica's shoulders, David and Marcus grinning behind them. The search operation consumed 6 weeks and involved hundreds of people. Park rangers led professional teams through every accessible trail within 20 miles of the car. Search and rescue volunteers came from across the region, some with specialized equipment for examining thermal areas and water features. Helicopters swept the vast wilderness daily, thermal imaging cameras scanning for any trace of human presence. Diving teams searched Yellowstone Lake and the major rivers, though hypothermia would have been fatal within minutes in the spring runoff. Linda Morrison became the face of the desperate families. She organized search parties that returned every weekend, hiking trails until her feet bled, and her voice gave out from calling her daughter's name. Television crews followed her through the park, cameras capturing her grief and determination. Linda gave interviews on local news, holding photos of the 4 friends, begging anyone with information to come forward. She slept in her car in parking lots, refusing to leave while search operations continued. David's parents brought scientific methodology to the search. Dr. Park studied topographical maps and weather patterns, calculating probable travel routes and survival scenarios. Helen Park coordinated with medical teams, preparing for potential rescue situations. They funded helicopter searches and hired private investigators, approaching their son's disappearance like a complex medical diagnosis requiring systematic analysis. Jessica's mother, Carmen, understood survival in different ways. A nurse who had worked emergency rooms for 15 years, she knew how people died and how they sometimes lived through impossible circumstances. Carmen joined every search team that would accept her, hiking until exhaustion forced her to stop. She understood the clock was ticking, that survival chances dropped dramatically with each passing day. Carmen organized volunteer shifts and managed supply logistics, turning her grief into action. Marcus's family brought community support and emotional strength. His parents, Beth and Tom Bailey, had raised their children in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where crisis brought people together rather than driving them apart. Grace Bailey, Marcus's younger sister, created social media campaigns that reached millions of people. She designed missing person flyers and organized campus awareness events. The Bailey family's house became unofficial headquarters for the families, a place where hope was carefully maintained despite growing desperation. The investigation revealed no evidence of foul play, animal attacks, or environmental accidents. The friends had followed their registered hiking plan exactly, staying on marked trails and checking in at designated points. Weather conditions were ideal: clear skies, moderate temperatures, no sudden storms or dangerous conditions. Wildlife activity was normal for the season. Thermal features showed no signs of disturbance. The 4 simply vanished from a well-traveled area in broad daylight without leaving any trace. Detective Walsh interviewed dozens of people who had seen the group that final day. A park ranger remembered checking their permits and commenting on their preparation level. A tour group leader recalled passing them on the trail, noting how they seemed to be enjoying themselves. A maintenance worker saw them photographing thermal features near Grand Prismatic Spring around 10:30 that morning. After 11 a.m., no one reported seeing them anywhere. Sarah's final text message was sent at 11:47 a.m. from coordinates placing her phone at the edge of Grand Prismatic Spring. "Mom, this place is so beautiful. I wish you could see what we're seeing right now. Love you." The message was delivered normally, but Sarah's phone never connected to cell towers again. Technical analysis showed the device had been powered off or destroyed immediately after transmission. The family's unity began fracturing under the pressure of months without answers. David's parents questioned whether the friends had been as prepared as everyone believed. Jessica's mother wondered if art supplies had somehow weighted her daughter down during an emergency. Marcus's family struggled with their son's decision to lead the group off established tourist routes. Linda Morrison blamed herself for raising Sarah to be too trusting, too willing to help others even in dangerous situations. But what haunted Linda most wasn't the practical questions about search areas and evidence analysis. It was the growing certainty that something impossible had happened in Yellowstone that day, something that didn't fit normal explanations for missing hikers. The thermal features seemed different when she visited, too active, too alive. Steam patterns looked wrong, sulfur smells carried traces of something else, something she couldn't identify. And sometimes, walking the trails her daughter had hiked, Linda heard voices in the distance, minus laughter, conversation, the sound of young people enjoying the wilderness together. After 18 months, official search operations ended. The families were told that without new evidence, there was nothing more Park Services could do. The case remained open but inactive. Media attention faded to occasional anniversary articles. Tourist season continued, families visiting Yellowstone to see the same thermal features where 4 friends had simply vanished. Linda Morrison refused to accept closure. She purchased a small cabin near the park and began making monthly pilgrimages to the memorial bench she had commissioned. The bench overlooked Grand Prismatic Spring, positioned exactly where Sarah's final text had been sent. Linda would sit there for hours, talking to the metal plaque as if her daughter could hear every word about work troubles, family news, and the garden they had planted together. The other families dealt with loss differently. David's parents established a scholarship fund and threw themselves into medical research. Jessica's mother returned to nursing but struggled with depression and survivor guilt. Marcus's family stayed close to Boulder, maintaining hope while learning to function around the Marcus-shaped hole in their lives. Grace Bailey kept her brother's camera equipment and took up photography, as if capturing the world might somehow bring him back. That October morning was different from Linda's usual visits. She had arrived before dawn, driving through darkness to reach the memorial bench as sunrise painted the thermal features in gold and pink. The morning air carried autumn crispness, and elk were calling from somewhere beyond the hot springs. Linda brought yellow daisies, Sarah's favorites, and a letter she had written but never intended to mail, words expressing grief and love, and questions that had no answers. As Linda arranged flowers on the bench, she heard footsteps approaching across the parking lot. Measured, familiar steps that made her pause with her hands still on the flower stems. When she finally looked up, her world tilted sideways. Walking toward her across the asphalt was her daughter Sarah, unchanged, wearing the same blue jacket from her final Instagram photo, looking exactly as she had 2 years ago. Sarah stopped 10 feet away, close enough for Linda to see that her skin showed no effects of wilderness survival. Her hair was the exact length it had been when she disappeared. Her clothes were clean and unfaded. She looked like she had stepped out of one of Marcus's photographs, preserved perfectly while time had carved lines of grief into her mother's face. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the space between them like an echo from another world. Linda Morrison gripped the memorial bench for support, staring at the daughter she had grieved for 2 years. The morning steam from Grand Prismatic Spring swirled around them, and somewhere in that mist, impossibility became reality. "Sarah," Linda whispered. "Baby, where have you been? Where are David and Jessica and Marcus?" But Sarah's expression remained calm, measuring, as if she were calculating something Linda couldn't understand. When she spoke again, her words made the world feel even more unstable. "They were never here, Mom," Sarah said quietly. "David and Jessica and Marcus, they never existed." Detective Rebecca Walsh received the call at 7:32 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Linda Morrison's voice was shaking so badly Walsh could barely understand the words coming through the phone. "She's back," Linda kept repeating. "Sarah's back. But she's saying things that don't make sense. Detective, she doesn't remember her friends." Walsh had handled enough family crises to recognize the sound of someone whose grip on reality was slipping. 2 years of grief could break even the strongest parent, and Linda Morrison had been walking a tightrope between hope and despair since her daughter disappeared. But something in Linda's voice made Walsh listen more carefully. This wasn't the frantic excitement of a false sighting. This was the controlled terror of someone whose world had just shifted in ways that challenged everything she believed about reality. The drive to Yellowstone gave Walsh time to contact the other families. Dr. James Park answered on the first ring, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. "If Sarah Morrison has returned, she might have information about David. We're driving to the park immediately." Helen Park's voice came from the background, already making arrangements to leave Seattle. For 2 years they had maintained scientific hope that their methodical son had somehow survived in the wilderness. Carmen Cole was harder to reach. The emergency room where she worked as a nurse had learned to expect her emotional volatility around any mention of missing persons cases. When Walsh finally connected with her supervisor, the message was blunt. Carmen left her shift the moment she got the call. "She's probably already on the road to Wyoming. She does this every time there's a potential sighting." Grace Bailey was in class at the University of Colorado when Walsh reached her. The journalism student who had organized social media campaigns for her missing brother Marcus immediately began planning coverage. "I'm bringing camera equipment," she told Walsh. "If Sarah Morrison is really back, if she has information about what happened to them, this story needs to be documented. The families deserve answers." But the first challenge came before any family arrived at Yellowstone. Walsh requested accommodation records from the Old Faithful Inn, trying to locate Sarah Morrison. The front desk clerk, a college student named Ashley, looked confused when Walsh showed her Sarah's photo. I don't remember checking anyone in who looks like this," Ashley said slowly. "But room 214 is occupied. Has been for—" She paused, frowning. "I want to say 2 years. But that doesn't make sense. We don't have guests who stay for 2 years." The hotel manager, Tom Rodriguez, reviewed registration records with growing bewilderment. "According to our system, Sarah Morrison checked in on March 15, 2022. She's listed as a seasonal park employee, authorized for extended stay, but I also have records showing that room has been vacant since last week." He rubbed his temples, staring at contradictory data on his computer screen. "Both sets of records are in our official system. I don't understand how that's possible." Walsh decided to approach room 214 directly, but stopped when she encountered Linda Morrison in the hotel lobby. Sarah's mother looked like she had aged a decade overnight. Dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling as she clutched a cup of coffee, clothes wrinkled from sleeping in her car outside the park. "She won't see me," Linda whispered. "My own daughter won't see me. She says she doesn't understand why I'm so upset." When Walsh knocked on the door of room 214, the young woman who answered looked exactly like the Sarah Morrison from missing person files. Same height, same hair color, same facial features. But her expression held none of the warmth Walsh remembered from family photos. Sarah looked at the detective with polite confusion, as if Walsh were a stranger asking for directions. "I'm Detective Walsh. I worked on your missing person case." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've been working here in the park for 2 years. I've never been missing." She showed Walsh an employee identification badge, park service documentation, and timesheets showing consistent work as a naturalist guide, all dated back to March 22, 2022, 1 week after she had supposedly vanished. The families began arriving throughout the day, and Walsh watched their reunion attempts with growing unease. Dr. and Helen Park stood outside Sarah's hotel room for 3 hours, taking turns knocking and calling through the door. "Sarah, we need to ask you about David. Please, we just need to know what happened to our son." But Sarah's response was the same each time. "I don't know anyone named David Park." Carmen Cole brought photo albums and Jessica's sketchbooks, spreading them across tables in the hotel lobby. She approached other guests, showing them pictures of the 4 friends together, asking if anyone remembered seeing them 2 years ago, but the responses were disturbing. Some hotel employees remembered Sarah Morrison working as a park guide. Others remembered a missing person search for Sarah Morrison. None remembered David Park, Jessica Cole, or Marcus Bailey at all. Grace Bailey arrived with her laptop and camera equipment, ready to document what she expected would be the breakthrough in her brother's disappearance. Instead, she found herself staring at employment records showing Sarah Morrison had been working in Yellowstone continuously for 2 years. But the search operations, Grace said, her voice rising. The volunteers, the helicopters, the media coverage, you can't fake all of that. The media attention began within hours of news spreading that one of the missing Yellowstone students had returned. Local news crews arrived first, followed by regional networks, then national outlets drawn by the human interest angle. Reporters clustered around the hotel, interviewing anyone willing to speak about the case. The story had everything media loved: young people, wilderness mystery, family drama, and now an impossible return. Walsh found herself managing press conferences she never wanted to give. We are investigating reports that Sarah Morrison, who was reported missing 2 years ago, has been located. However, the circumstances are unusual, and we're still gathering information. But the questions from reporters revealed how complex the situation had become. Detective Walsh, park records show Sarah Morrison has been employed here for 2 years. How can someone be missing and employed simultaneously? If Sarah Morrison never left Yellowstone, why did her family report her missing? Are you investigating false reporting, or is this a case of amnesia? The families began fracturing under media pressure and contradictory evidence. Dr. Park cornered Walsh in the hotel restaurant, his scientific training demanding logical explanations. Someone is lying, he said flatly. Either Sarah Morrison is lying about never leaving the park, or her family filed false missing person reports. My son David was in those group photos. He exists. We have his birth certificate, his dental records, his college transcripts. But when Dr. Park contacted the University of Denver to request David's academic records, the registrar's office had no record of any student named David Park. His supposed pre-med courses, his study group with Sarah Morrison, his planned medical school applications, none of it existed in university databases. Dr. Park's voice shook as he read the email response. We have thoroughly searched our records and find no enrollment for any student matching that name and demographic information. Carmen Cole's nursing training had taught her to trust documented evidence over emotional memory. But when she contacted Jessica's art professors to request academic records, she received similar responses. The University of Colorado had no record of Jessica Cole in their fine arts program. The scholarship Carmen remembered her daughter receiving had never been awarded. The professors who had supposedly praised Jessica's artistic talent had no memory of teaching her. Grace Bailey's investigation into Marcus's college experience revealed the most disturbing contradictions. The journalism department had no record of Marcus Bailey as a student. The photography equipment Grace remembered him using was registered to Jessica Cole, who had supposedly been studying art at a different university. The social media campaigns Grace remembered organizing for Marcus's disappearance appeared in her internet history, but referenced only Sarah Morrison as a missing person. Walsh organized a meeting with all families and hotel management to address the contradictions. The conference room felt like a courtroom where impossible testimony was being presented as evidence. Linda Morrison sat across from her daughter, showing her family photos, home videos, and personal items. Sarah examined each piece of evidence with polite interest but no recognition. "This is a lovely photo," Sarah said, studying a picture of herself with 3 other young people at a birthday party. "I like my dress in this shot, but I don't recognize the other people. Are they family friends?" Linda Morrison stared at the photo, showing Sarah laughing with David, Jessica, and Marcus, friends she had considered family. Dr. Park presented David's medical school acceptance letter, which he had found in Sarah's hotel room. The letter was authentic, printed on official Johns Hopkins letterhead, congratulating David on exceptional performance. But when Dr. Park called Johns Hopkins admissions office, they had no record of any application from David Park. The MCAT scores referenced in the letter corresponded to test dates when David had supposedly been missing. Carmen Cole showed Jessica's artwork to Sarah, pointing out sketches that clearly depicted camping trips and college experiences. Sarah studied the drawings with professional interest. "These are very talented sketches," she said. "The artist has a good eye for capturing outdoor scenes, but I don't remember posing for any of these drawings." Grace Bailey played audio recordings of Marcus's voice, saved from college projects and family gatherings. Sarah listened politely but showed no recognition. "He sounds like a nice person," she said when the recordings ended, "but I've never heard this voice before." The investigation expanded as Walsh contacted everyone who had participated in the original search operations. Park rangers, volunteer searchers, helicopter pilots, cadaver dog handlers. Their testimonies created an impossible pattern. Some remembered searching for 4 missing college students. Others remembered searching only for Sarah Morrison. Still others remembered Sarah Morrison working as a park guide during the same time period when searches were supposedly occurring. Ranger Tom Martinez had supervised Sarah's employment for 2 years while simultaneously participating in search operations for her disappearance. "I know how this sounds," he told Walsh, rubbing his temples as if fighting a migraine, "but both memories feel completely real. I remember hiring Sarah as a seasonal naturalist. I remember her excellent work with tourist groups, and I also remember searching for her with rescue teams." The helicopter pilot who had conducted aerial searches presented flight logs showing dozens of search missions for 4 missing persons. But when Walsh cross-referenced the dates, those same days showed helicopter tours guided by Sarah Morrison for park visitors. Radio transcripts revealed conversations where the pilot reported seeing a park naturalist matching Sarah Morrison's description while searching for Sarah Morrison. Media coverage intensified as contradictory evidence emerged. Cable news programs featured expert panels debating whether the situation represented false memory syndrome, media manipulation, or something unprecedented in missing person investigations. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories ranging from government cover-ups to psychological experiments conducted on grieving families. The family unity that had sustained them through 2 years of searching began dissolving under public scrutiny and impossible evidence. Dr. Park accused Linda Morrison of filing false reports. "If your daughter was never missing, why did you involve our family in this delusion? We spent our savings, took leave from work, searched for children who apparently never existed." Carmen Cole confronted Grace Bailey about the social media campaigns. "If Marcus was never a real person, why did you create online profiles for him? Why did you organize search parties for someone who was never missing?" Grace showed Carmen her browser history, phone records, and social media analytics proving the campaigns had been real and extensive. Linda Morrison defended her memories with increasing desperation. "I know my daughter was missing. I know she had friends named David, Jessica, and Marcus. I have home videos. I have phone records. I have 2 years of grief counseling sessions discussing their disappearance." But when Walsh requested those counseling records, the therapist had notes documenting Linda's grief over Sarah's disappearance, but no mention of 3 additional missing persons. The psychiatric evaluations Walsh ordered revealed normal mental health across all family members. No signs of delusional thinking, no evidence of false memory syndrome, no indication of coordinated deception. Everyone tested showed normal cognitive function, consistent personality profiles, and genuine emotional responses to their contradictory memories. But the psychological stress of maintaining 2 incompatible versions of reality began affecting everyone involved. Dr. Park developed chronic headaches, complaining that thinking about David made his skull feel like it was splitting apart. Carmen Cole started taking sleeping pills to escape dreams where Jessica sketched in empty rooms. Grace Bailey stopped eating regularly, claiming food tasted wrong when she tried to remember Marcus at family dinners. Sarah Morrison remained unchanged throughout the investigation. No signs of stress, confusion, or concern about the chaos surrounding her supposed return. She reported to work each day as a park naturalist, leading tourist groups through thermal features, explaining geological formations with expertise that suggested years of experience. Visitors rated her tours highly, praising her knowledge and enthusiasm. Walsh interviewed tourists who had taken Sarah's guided tours during the 2 years she was supposedly missing. Their reviews and photos confirmed consistent employment, but the vacation photos told impossible stories. Images from family trips showed Sarah Morrison guiding thermal spring tours for tourists who had visited Yellowstone while search operations were ongoing for Sarah Morrison. The evidence analysis revealed technological impossibilities that challenged basic assumptions about documentation and memory. Timestamps on digital photos were authentic but contradictory. Employment records were genuine but impossible. Video footage was unedited but showed events that couldn't have occurred simultaneously. Walsh brought in federal investigators specializing in fraud, but their analysis confirmed that all documentation was legitimate. No evidence of forgery, digital manipulation, or coordinated deception. Bank records, employment files, academic transcripts, medical records, everything was authentic but contradictory. The case presented evidence that seemed to violate basic principles of causality and linear time. As the investigation continued into its third week, Walsh noticed changes in everyone involved. The contradictory memories became less distressing and more accepted as simply different versions of events that had somehow both occurred. Family members spoke casually about searching for children who had never existed while discussing employment records for the person they had been seeking. The thermal features around Grand Prismatic Spring began showing unusual activity during the investigation period. Park geologists recorded temperature fluctuations that defied normal thermal dynamics. Mineral deposits appeared and disappeared without geological explanation. Water chemistry varied outside standard parameters, as if the spring itself was responding to human emotional stress. But what disturbed Walsh most was her own changing perception of the case. She found herself filing reports that documented both versions of events as equally factual. Missing person case files listed 4 disappeared students. Employment records showed Sarah Morrison working continuously. Both sets of documentation felt authentic and necessary, even though they contradicted each other completely. The media eventually lost interest as the story became too complex for simple narratives. Family members returned to their daily lives, carrying impossible memories that felt completely real. Sarah Morrison continued working as a park naturalist, leading tours through thermal features that bubbled and steamed with ancient secrets. Walsh closed her investigation with a report that would never satisfy anyone seeking simple explanations. 4 college students had disappeared in Yellowstone National Park. 1 student had never left the park. 3 students had never existed. All statements were simultaneously true and impossible, supported by evidence that challenged everything she understood about the nature of reality itself. 3 weeks into the investigation, Detective Rebecca Walsh stood at the edge of Grand Prismatic Spring as dawn painted the thermal features in impossible colors. The steam rose in patterns that seemed too deliberate, too organized, forming shapes that looked almost like faces before dissolving into morning mist. Behind her, the families gathered for what everyone understood would be their final confrontation with Sarah Morrison. Linda Morrison sat on the memorial bench that bore her daughter's name, but her hands were clenched in her lap, no longer reaching for Sarah's touch. The gentle acceptance she had shown earlier had hardened into something sharper overnight. "I need you to explain something to me," Linda said, her voice carrying an edge that made Sarah look up from where she stood near the thermal spring. "I buried an empty coffin, Sarah. I held a memorial service with 300 people. I spoke at your funeral. How can you stand there so calm when your mother has been grieving your death for 2 years? Sarah's expression remained unchanged. That same polite attention she had shown throughout the investigation. "I'm sorry you experienced that grief, Mom. It must have been difficult. But as I've explained, I've been working here in the park. I've been exactly where I needed to be." But Linda Morrison was no longer accepting that explanation. She stood up from the memorial bench, her grief transforming into anger. "That's not an answer, Sarah. That's what you say to tourists when they ask about trail conditions. I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you for 22 years. I know when you're lying to me." Dr. James Park stepped forward, his scientific training finally reasserting itself after weeks of accepting impossible contradictions. "Something created false memories in all of us," he said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Someone or something made us believe in children who never existed, made us search for people who were never missing, But you, Sarah, you're real, you're here, which means you know what happened to us. Sarah's calm expression flickered for just a moment, something moving behind her eyes like a fish beneath still water. I don't know what you mean, she said, but her voice carried less certainty than before. Carmen Cole pulled out Jessica's artwork and spread it on the ground in front of Sarah. These drawings show you with 3 other people. Jessica spent hours sketching group camping trips, birthday parties, study sessions, but you're claiming those people never existed. Carmen's nursing training had taught her to recognize when patients were withholding information. If they never existed, why do these drawings show such detailed interactions? Why can I remember watching Jessica draw conversations between specific people with distinct personalities? Grace Bailey raised her camera, but instead of recording another polite interview, she focused on Sarah's face as the questions intensified. Through her lens, she caught micro-expressions that contradicted the calm demeanor, brief flashes of confusion, fear, and something else, something that looked like guilt. My brother Marcus documented everything, Grace said, her journalist instincts finally overriding her emotional confusion. I have photographs of equipment that supposedly belonged to him, social media campaigns I supposedly created for him, 4 years of family memories that include him, but you're telling us he never existed. Grace lowered her camera and stepped closer to Sarah. That's not false memory syndrome. That's not shared delusion. That's deliberate manipulation, and you know who did it. Sarah Morrison took a step backward toward the edge of Grand Prismatic Spring, and for the first time since her supposed return, she looked genuinely distressed. The steam from the thermal feature seemed to respond to her emotional state, rising higher, swirling in patterns that suggested movement beneath the surface. You don't understand, Sarah said, her carefully controlled voice finally cracking. You don't understand what this place is, what it does to people who stay too long. She pressed her hands to her temples as if fighting against competing thoughts. I never had friends named David, Jessica, and Marcus, but I also did have them. Both things are true because this place makes them true. Detective Walsh moved closer, recognizing the moment when a witness finally breaks. Sarah, what happened in Yellowstone 2 years ago? What happened to the people these families remember? Sarah's hands dropped from her temples, and when she looked up, her eyes held a different kind of awareness, not the polite confusion she had shown for weeks, but the sharp clarity of someone remembering things she had been forced to forget. We came here together, she whispered, all 4 of us. We were hiking near the thermal features when we found the entrance. The families leaned forward, finally hearing the testimony they had been waiting for. But as Sarah continued, her words revealed something more disturbing than disappearance or death. There's something under the thermal springs, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as suppressed memories surfaced. Not human, not animal, something old, something that's been here since the geological formations were created. It feeds on human consciousness, on the connections between people, on love and friendship and family bonds. Linda Morrison gripped the memorial bench for support. What do you mean it feeds? Sarah looked directly at her mother for the first time since the investigation began, and in her eyes was the recognition Linda had been desperate to see. But it came with horror instead of relief. It takes relationships and makes them real in different ways. David, Jessica, and Marcus existed because we loved them into existence. Our friendship was so strong, so important to us that when the entity found us, it used that love as food. Dr. Park's scientific mind recoiled from the explanation, but his parental grief made him push for details. What happened to David? Where is my son? He never existed as a separate person, Sarah said, tears finally appearing in her eyes. But he also always existed as part of what made our friendship work. I was David's cautious planning. Jessica was David's artistic sensitivity. Marcus was David's social connection. The entity took our group dynamic and separated it into individual people so it could feed on the bonds between them. Carmen Cole stared at Jessica's artwork with new understanding. Jessica was drawing herself alone because she was alone, but she was also drawing herself with friends because the loneliness was so profound that love created companions. Grace Bailey felt her world tilting sideways as implications crashed through her understanding. Marcus was what I needed him to be. The brother who encouraged my journalism, who shared my love of photography, who made our family feel complete. She looked at her camera equipment with new eyes. But the equipment was always mine. The social media campaigns were always my projects. I created a brother who could share my interests because I needed that connection. But Dr. Park wasn't ready to accept supernatural explanations. His grief had turned to anger, and that anger needed a target. "This is psychological manipulation," he said flatly. "Someone drugged you, Sarah. Someone created false memories and convinced you that this supernatural nonsense is real. My son David existed. I have his baby photos, his report cards, his medical records." Sarah shook her head, and the thermal spring behind her bubbled more violently, as if responding to the emotional tension. "The entity doesn't just take relationships," she said. "It creates evidence to support them. It reaches backward through time and makes the love feel as real as possible. Your medical records, your photos, your memories, they're all authentic because love made them authentic." But Helen Park joined her husband in rejecting the impossible explanation. "I carried David for 9 months. I felt him kick. I went through labor. You can't fake pregnancy and childbirth with false memories." "You can if the entity makes those experiences as real as they need to be," Sarah replied. "It doesn't create false memories. It creates real experiences that exist in spaces between documented reality and emotional truth." The families began fracturing again, but this time over whether to accept Sarah's supernatural testimony or continue searching for logical explanations. Linda Morrison found herself caught between wanting to believe her daughter and refusing to accept that her grief had been manipulated by something inhuman. Detective Walsh recognized the pattern from other cases involving alleged supernatural encounters, families splitting between those desperate for any explanation and those rejecting anything that couldn't be proven in court. "Sarah, if this entity exists, if it manipulates human consciousness, why were you released? Why are you here instead of David, Jessica, and Marcus?" Sarah's expression darkened, and she turned to face Grand Prismatic Spring directly. The steam patterns shifted, and for a moment, everyone present could see shapes moving beneath the superheated water. Not fish, not geological formations, but something else entirely. "Because I made a deal," Sarah whispered. "The entity offered to let one of us return to the normal world, but only if that person agreed to serve as an anchor, someone who could help it reach other families, other relationships, other sources of love to feed on." She looked back at the families with something approaching shame. "I chose to come back. I chose to let David, Jessica, and Marcus continue existing only in the spaces between reality and memory." The revelation hit the families like a physical blow. Linda Morrison sat down heavily on the memorial bench, staring at her daughter with a mixture of love and horror. "You sacrificed your friends to escape." "I sacrificed my friends to return to you," Sarah replied. "But I also didn't sacrifice them because they continue to exist in every way that matters to the people who love them. The entity doesn't destroy relationships. It transforms them into different kinds of reality." Grace Bailey lowered her camera, finally understanding why her documentation had felt so important throughout the investigation. "You've been feeding it our grief," she said quietly, "bringing families together, intensifying their emotional connections, giving it more material to work with." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Every time families come to Yellowstone searching for lost connections, every time people visit this place hoping to find something they've lost, the entity grows stronger. It feeds on hope and love and the need for relationships that feel real even when they can't be documented." Dr. Park's anger finally boiled over. "So our son never existed. Our love for him is artificial, and you've been helping this thing manipulate other families." He stepped toward Sarah, his scientific objectivity replaced by paternal fury. "How many other families have you helped destroy?" But before Sarah could answer, the thermal spring behind her erupted in a column of superheated water and steam that reached 30 feet into the air. When the geyser subsided, the families found themselves facing something that challenged every assumption about what was possible in the natural world. The water in Grand Prismatic Spring had become transparent, revealing structures beneath the surface that looked like a combination of crystalline formations and organic architecture. Passages and chambers extended deep into the earth, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. And moving through those underwater spaces were shapes that might once have been human but had been transformed into something else entirely. "David, Jessica, and Marcus are still here," Sarah said, her voice carrying both sadness and something approaching relief. "They're part of the entity now, helping it understand human consciousness, teaching it how to create relationships that feel real enough to sustain themselves." Carmen Cole knelt at the edge of the spring, staring into the transparent water. Deep in the crystalline passages, she could see a figure that moved with Jessica's graceful gestures, tending to formations that pulsed with artistic beauty. "She's still creating," Carmen whispered. "Even down there, she's still making beautiful things." Grace Bailey focused her camera on the underwater structures, capturing images that would never be believed but felt more true than any documentation she had ever created. In the depths, a figure that carried himself with Marcus's confident energy was arranging bioluminescent patterns, creating displays that looked like photography composed of living light. Dr. Park found himself staring at a figure in the deepest chambers, moving with the methodical precision that had been David's trademark. The figure was tending to complex crystalline structures that pulsed with rhythms resembling heartbeats or breathing, as if maintaining life support systems for impossible forms of existence. "They're not dead," Helen Park said, her voice filled with wonder and horror in equal measure. "But they're not alive in any way we can understand." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face as she finally told the complete truth. The entity offered them a choice. They could dissolve completely, or they could become part of something larger, helping it create relationships for other people who needed connections they couldn't find in ordinary reality. They chose to help. Linda Morrison stood and walked to the edge of the thermal spring, looking down at the impossible structures beneath the surface. "Can they see us? Do they know we're here?" As if responding to her question, the bioluminescent patterns in the underwater chambers shifted and changed, forming shapes that spelled out words in languages made of light, messages from David to his parents, from Jessica to her mother, from Marcus to his sister, reassurances that they were happy, that they had found purpose, that their love for their families continued in forms that transcended physical existence. But Detective Walsh was not ready to accept supernatural explanations, even when confronted with impossible evidence. "This is mass hallucination," she said firmly. "Environmental toxins from the thermal features, psychological pressure from the investigation, shared delusion reinforced by group suggestion. There's a scientific explanation for everything we're experiencing." Dr. Park found himself torn between his scientific training and the evidence of his own eyes. "The water chemistry," he said slowly, "the mineral compositions that didn't match geological surveys. If there's something living in the thermal system, something that can manipulate human perception."
"Dad, look," Grace Bailey said, pointing her camera toward the underwater structures. Through her lens she could see David in the deepest chamber, and he was holding up a sign that showed complex mathematical equations. "He's showing us proof. Those are the calculations for thermal dynamics that would be required to support the crystalline structures. He's giving us the scientific evidence you need."
The families spent the rest of the day at the edge of Grand Prismatic Spring, communicating with David, Jessica, and Marcus through patterns of light and crystalline formations that responded to their emotional states. It was not the reunion any of them had imagined, but it was contact with the people they loved in forms that transcended ordinary definitions of life and death. But as evening approached, the families found themselves facing impossible choices. The entity that lived beneath Yellowstone's thermal features was offering them the same option it had given Sarah's friend group. They could return to their normal lives, carrying memories of relationships that existed only in spaces between reality and documentation, or they could join David, Jessica, and Marcus in the crystalline chambers, becoming part of something larger that helped other families find connections they desperately needed. Linda Morrison was the first to make her choice. "I want to stay with Sarah," she said simply. "Whether she's my daughter who was never missing, or my daughter who made a deal with something inhuman, she's still my daughter. But I also want to know that David, Jessica, and Marcus are happy in whatever form of existence they've chosen. Dr. and Helen Park chose differently. If David is really down there, Dr. Park said, if he's found a way to continue existing that brings him purpose and happiness, then we need to trust his choice. But we also need to return to our lives and find ways to honor his memory that make sense in the world we understand. Carmen Cole surprised everyone by asking the entity for permission to visit the crystalline chambers periodically, to see Jessica's ongoing artistic creations, and to understand how love could exist in forms that transcended physical reality. The thermal spring's response was a pattern of lights that seemed to indicate welcome and invitation. Grace Bailey made the most unexpected choice of all. She asked to stay at Yellowstone as a park photographer, documenting the thermal features and helping other families who came searching for lost connections. Marcus taught me that some stories can only be told through images, she said. If this place helps people find relationships they need, then I want to help tell those stories. As the families prepared to leave Yellowstone, Sarah Morrison walked to the edge of Grand Prismatic Spring one final time. The transparent water showed her David, Jessica, and Marcus in their crystalline chambers, creating patterns of light that spelled out messages of love and gratitude. They had found forms of existence that allowed them to help other people experience the kinds of relationships they had shared, turning their friendship into something that could benefit strangers who needed connections they couldn't find in ordinary reality. Detective Walsh filed her final report on a case that challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness, reality, and the boundaries between what could be documented and what could be true. Her conclusion was simple. Some mysteries existed not to be solved, but to expand human understanding of what was possible when love became powerful enough to reshape reality itself. The memorial bench remained in place, honoring friends who had both existed and never existed, who had both died and found new forms of life, who had both been lost and been found in ways that transcended ordinary definitions of presence and absence. And Grand Prismatic Spring continued to steam and bubble with waters that held secrets about the spaces where human consciousness could interface with forces older and larger than anything science had yet discovered. Years later, families would continue to visit Yellowstone when traditional searches for missing loved ones had failed. Some would find transparent moments in the thermal features, glimpses of people they had lost living different kinds of lives in crystalline chambers beneath the earth. Others would simply find peace with mysteries that didn't require solutions to provide comfort. But everyone who encountered the entity beneath Grand Prismatic Spring learned the same truth. Love could create realities that existed independently of documentation, relationships that transcended physical presence, and connections that survived even when they couldn't be verified by any conventional means. Sometimes the most real things were the ones that could never be proven to exist, and sometimes the most lasting presence was found in spaces between what was documented and what was true.